There, there. Push, push, push.
The morning I discovered something had torn a 600-pound boulder from its centuries-old resting place and hurled it 30 feet down a hillside, I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Seismic activity, maybe. Vandals with heavy equipment. Anything except what the old logging roads and hunters' trails in these mountains had been whispering about for generations. My name is Marcus Rivera, and for 8 years I'd worked as a wildlife specialist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, spending my days tracking animal populations, investigating habitat disturbances, and filing endless reports that most people would never read. The work suited my methodical nature and my preference for solitude over the politics of the main office in Redding. I'd chosen this career specifically because it kept me in the field, away from people, surrounded by the predictable rhythms of the natural world. That predictability shattered in early July 1991, somewhere in the remote backcountry of the Shasta Trinity National Forest, when I stumbled into something that would force me to question everything I thought I understood about the wilderness I'd spent nearly a decade studying. The day had started normally enough. I'd driven my state-issued Ford Ranger up Highway 299, the rising sun glinting off the Trinity River, then turned onto increasingly deteriorating forest roads until I reached the trailhead near Coffee Creek. My assignment was straightforward: investigate reports of unusual wildlife activity in the Bear Gulch area, specifically damaged vegetation and disturbed ground that local hunters had reported over the past 6 weeks. The area had a reputation for producing strange stories, unexplained sounds, missing equipment, animals behaving oddly, but that was true of most remote wilderness zones. People got spooked when they realized how truly alone they were in the backcountry. My supervisor, a perpetually stressed woman named Patricia Chen, who ran our regional field office, had been dismissive of the reports until a Forest Service surveyor named Greg Hutchins had filed an official incident report describing what he called inexplicable environmental damage in the upper reaches of Bear Gulch. Greg was a solid professional with 20 years of experience, not the type to exaggerate or panic over wildlife activity. When he'd come into the office 3 days ago, he'd looked genuinely shaken. Patricia had shown me his report that morning, her skepticism evident in the way she'd tossed the folder onto my desk. "Rivera, I need you to drive up there and figure out what's got Hutchins rattled. He claims there's damage that doesn't match any known animal activity or human cause. Trees pushed over, ground torn up, that sort of thing. Probably just bears marking territory or illegal off-road vehicles. But we need documentation either way." I'd nodded, already mentally packing my field kit. "When do you want me there?" Today, if possible. Pack for 4 or 5 days. The area Hutchins described is about 12 miles in from the Coffee Creek trailhead. Rough terrain, minimal trails. You'll need to establish a base camp and do a systematic survey of the entire zone. Patricia had pulled up a topographic map on her computer screen. The affected area appears to be concentrated here, in this drainage between Bear Gulch and Deadfall Ridge, about 8 square miles of steep, heavily forested terrain. She'd looked at me seriously. "Marcus, I need you to be thorough. If there's actual habitat destruction happening, we need to document it and identify the cause. If it's just Hutchins getting spooked by normal forest activity, I need to know that too. We can't have our contractors filing panic reports every time they see something unusual." Now, 6 hours later, I was 3 miles into the hike and already finding evidence that matched Hutchins's description. A mature Douglas fir, probably 80 years old and 3 feet in diameter, lay across the trail. It hadn't been cut, and there was no evidence of lightning strike or disease. The tree had simply been pushed over with enough force to tear its massive root system from the ground, leaving a gaping wound in the earth. I photographed it from multiple angles, noting in my field journal that the direction of fall didn't align with the prevailing wind patterns for this valley. The surrounding trees showed no similar damage, which ruled out a microburst or other weather phenomenon. 50 yards further up the trail, I found the boulder I mentioned, a massive chunk of granite that had clearly been displaced from its original position. The depression where it had rested was still visible, a dark, damp oval surrounded by decades of accumulated organic matter. But the boulder itself had been moved a considerable distance and now rested against a stand of young cedars, crushing them. I did rough calculations based on the stone's dimensions. At minimum, it weighed 500 pounds, probably closer to 700. Moving it would have required either multiple people with proper equipment or a single source of tremendous strength. Yet the forest floor showed no evidence of equipment, no tire tracks, no excavation marks, nothing but undisturbed duff and vegetation. I spent 20 minutes examining the area, taking soil samples, photographing the displacement patterns, and searching for any explanation that fit within my understanding of wildlife behavior or human activity. Black bears could be destructive, but not on this scale. Grizzlies had been extinct in California since the 1920s. Illegal logging would leave obvious equipment traces. I recorded everything in my field notes and continued up the trail, moving deeper into the Bear Gulch drainage. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, creating that particular quality of light unique to old-growth forests, where massive trunks absorbed most of the illumination, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. It was beautiful in an austere way, but I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of forest life, bird calls, insect buzz, the chatter of squirrels, were muted almost to the point of silence. In 8 years of fieldwork, I'd learned that animals went quiet for specific reasons: a predator nearby, human activity, something that triggered their survival instincts. But I could see no obvious threat, and the silence extended too far to be explained by my presence alone. The trail climbed steeply, following an old creek bed that was currently dry in the summer heat. I paused to drink from my water bottle and consult the topographic map. According to Hutchins' report, the most severe damage was concentrated another 2 miles ahead, in a section where the drainage opened into a small valley surrounded by dense timber. I checked my watch, nearly 4 in the afternoon. I'd make camp at the valley and spend tomorrow conducting a systematic survey of the area. As I folded the map and prepared to continue hiking, I heard something that made me freeze. 3 sharp impacts echoed through the forest, evenly spaced, each one a distinct crack of wood striking wood. The sound came from somewhere ahead, perhaps a quarter-mile distant. I waited, listening intently. The sound repeated after a brief pause, same rhythm, same spacing, 3 deliberate strikes. My mind catalogued potential explanations. A hiker or hunter using a walking stick, a woodpecker, falling branches. But none of those explanations quite fit. The sound was too loud, too deliberate, too evenly paced. And it seemed designed to carry, to be heard at a distance. I continued up the trail, moving more cautiously now, paying closer attention to my surroundings. 20 minutes later, I found the first footprint. It was in a muddy section beside a small spring, pressed deep into the soft earth. My professional training kicked in automatically. I knelt beside it, pulling out my tape measure and camera. The print was massive, 16.5 inches long, 7 inches wide at the ball, with 5 distinct toe impressions. The morphology was humanoid, but the proportions were wrong. The foot was too wide, the arch too flat, the toes too thick and splayed compared to any human foot I'd ever seen. The depth of the impression suggested enormous weight. I took measurements of the displacement, calculating roughly based on soil density and moisture content. Whatever made this print weighed somewhere between 500 and 800 pounds. I photographed it extensively, placing my own boot beside it for scale, then followed the trail of prints leading away from the spring. There were 6 clear impressions, each about 4 feet apart, indicating a walking stride, not running. The prints led northeast up a steep embankment and into dense forest where the ground became too hard to show clear tracks. I sat back on my heels, camera in hand, forcing myself to think rationally. The print was real, physically present, measurable. It wasn't a hoax. Not out here, 12 miles from the nearest road, in terrain that few people visited. But what could have made it? My training told me to document and report, not to speculate. But the implications were unavoidable. This print didn't match any known wildlife in California. It was too large for a human, wrong shape for a bear, impossible for any other creature documented in these mountains. I was still crouched beside the print, reviewing the photographs on my camera, when I heard a voice behind me. "You should turn back while you still can." I spun around, hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. An old man stood on the trail about 15 feet away. He appeared to be Native American, probably in his 70s, with deeply weathered skin and long white hair braided down his back. He wore practical outdoor clothing, canvas pants, a denim shirt, and a vest covered with various pockets, and carried a gnarled walking staff carved from a single piece of wood. Despite his age, he stood straight and moved with a quiet grace that suggested decades of walking these mountains. "I'm Marcus Rivera, California Fish and Wildlife," I said, relaxing slightly but still wary. I hadn't heard him approach, which was unusual. "I'm conducting a wildlife survey in this area." I know who you are and why you're here," the old man said. His voice was deep and measured, with an accent that suggested English wasn't his first language. "I am Joseph Running Deer. My people have lived in these mountains longer than your government has existed." I nodded respectfully. "I apologize if I'm on tribal land. According to my maps, this area is federal forest, but I know boundaries can be complicated. Your maps show lines drawn by politicians who never walked these valleys," Joseph said, moving closer. "They don't show the real boundaries, the ones that matter, the ones that have kept the peace for many lifetimes." Despite my natural skepticism, something about his manner commanded attention. "What boundaries do you mean?" Joseph pointed northeast with his staff. "From that ridgeline to the old fire scar near Squaw Creek, there is a territory that belongs to others. My people have an understanding with them. We respect their lands. We leave offerings at the markers. In return, they allow us to hunt and gather in the lower valleys without interference." "The others," I repeated carefully. "You're talking about whatever made these tracks?" Joseph's dark eyes held mine steadily. "You've seen the signs. The trees moved by strength no machine possesses. The earth torn by hands that leave no tracks you can recognize. You're a scientist, Marcus Rivera. You document what you see. So document this. There are beings in these mountains that your science hasn't acknowledged. Beings that have lived here since before the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. My people call them the Ancient Ones. You might call them something else." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm afternoon. "Are you saying Sasquatch are real, that they live in this area?" "That is one name among many. The truth is more complex than the stories told around campfires." Joseph gestured at the destruction I'd documented. "This damage you've been sent to investigate, it's not random. It marks boundaries. The Ancient Ones are warning your people to stay back, to respect the territory that has always been theirs." "I appreciate the cultural perspective," I said slowly, "but I have a job to do. I need to survey this entire drainage and document any environmental disturbances. Then you will cross into their territory, and that is very unwise." Joseph's expression grew serious. "But I can see you're determined, so I will tell you what you need to know. The Ancient Ones are not animals, despite what your science might want to classify them as. They have language, culture, families. They build shelters, make tools, teach their young. They remember. And right now they are afraid and angry. Something has invaded their deepest territories, something that makes loud explosions and tears apart the earth. They're being pushed out of their traditional ranges, forced closer to the boundaries, and that makes them defensive. I thought about the footprint, the displaced boulder, the pushed-over trees. What kind of explosions? I don't know exactly. Joseph reached into one of his vest pockets and pulled out a worn photograph. But 3 months ago, during a meeting at one of our traditional gathering places, an elder of the Ancient Ones showed me this. He handed me the photograph. It showed a section of forest that had been devastated. Trees were snapped and scattered like matchsticks. The ground was torn up, and in the center was a crater-like depression, roughly circular, maybe 25 feet across. The destruction was total within that radius, gradually diminishing outward. What caused this? I asked, studying the image. We don't know, but there have been 4 such sites found in the high country over the past 4 months. Each time the Ancient Ones discover one, they move their families further from that area. They're being driven out of territories they've held for thousands of years. Have you reported this to any authorities? The Forest Service? Our field office? Joseph gave a slight, bitter smile. And tell them what? That creatures your government insists don't exist are being frightened by mysterious explosions in the wilderness? They would dismiss me as a superstitious old Indian. But you've seen the evidence now. You know something is happening here that doesn't fit your normal explanations. He had a point. The footprint was real. The destruction was real. And if there were multiple sites like the one in the photograph, that represented a significant environmental disturbance that fell under state jurisdiction to investigate. Will you help me? Joseph asked. Will you use your position to find out what's happening in the deep forest? Not for curiosity, but because whatever is causing this threatens the balance that has existed in these mountains for countless generations. I looked at the photograph again, then at the massive footprint beside the spring. My scientific training warred with the implications of what I was seeing, but I'd built my career on evidence, and the evidence was undeniable. Yes, I'll investigate, I said, but I need your help too. If I'm going to search the deep backcountry, I need to understand how to avoid conflicts with these beings, how to show respect, how to move through their territory safely. Joseph smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Then we have an agreement. Make camp at the valley ahead. It's a safe place, neutral ground. Tonight, when the moon rises, I will come to your camp and teach you what you need to know. Tomorrow I will take you to meet one of their elders, if she agrees to it. She? They have families, social structures? The eldest female of the group I have contact with is their leader, their wisdom keeper. She's the one who showed me the photograph. If anyone can help you understand what's happening, it's her. Joseph started to walk away, then paused. Marcus Rivera, what I'm about to share with you is sacred knowledge, protected by my people for many generations. If you betray that trust, if you exploit this for personal gain or fame, you will endanger not only the Ancient Ones, but also the relationship we've built with them over centuries. Do you understand? I understand, I said solemnly. I'm not doing this for recognition. I'm doing it because it's my job to protect wildlife and habitat in this state. If something is threatening these mountains and the beings that live here, I need to know about it so I can stop it. Good. Then I will see you tonight. He walked down the trail, moving with surprising agility for his age, and disappeared around a bend. I stood there for several minutes, the photograph in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. Then I shouldered my pack and continued toward the valley, my mind racing with questions that had no easy answers. I reached the valley Joseph had mentioned about an hour before sunset. It was a small clearing, maybe 200 yards across, surrounded by towering pines and cedars. A creek ran through the center, providing fresh water, and the relatively flat ground made for decent camping. I set up my tent efficiently, having done this hundreds of times over the years. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I stopped and scanned the surrounding tree line, but saw nothing except shadows lengthening as the sun dropped behind the western ridges. The forest remained eerily quiet, that same unnatural silence I'd noticed earlier. Joseph arrived just as darkness fell completely. I heard his approach this time, the deliberate crunch of boots on forest duff. He emerged from the shadows carrying a small leather pack and the same walking staff. I'd built a small fire in the rock ring, and he settled onto one of the log benches, accepting a cup of coffee I offered. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I need to understand more." "What I'm about to teach you has been passed down through my family for many generations," Joseph began. For the next 2 hours, he taught me everything he knew about the ancient ones. He explained their communication methods, wood knocks, vocalizations, body language, their territorial markers, stacked stones, twisted branches, scratch marks on trees at specific heights. He described their seasonal patterns, their omnivorous diet, their temporary shelters. They cared for their sick and elderly, he emphasized. They had culture. They made tools, buried their dead, and communicated across vast distances. They were people, just not human people, and that distinction mattered. Around midnight, Joseph began the calling ceremony. He drummed a steady, complex rhythm that echoed through the dark forest. After several minutes, he began to sing in his native language, a haunting melody that seemed to belong to these mountains. When the song ended, we waited in silence. For a long while, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest to the north, came a response. Not an aggressive howl, but a series of low vocalizations, rising and falling in pitch, that seemed to answer Joseph's song. Joseph smiled, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "They accept. We meet at dawn at the northeastern boundary marker. Get some sleep, Marcus Rivera. Tomorrow you'll see things that will change how you understand the world." I managed only a few hours of fitful rest. When I crawled out of my tent at 4:30, Joseph was already there, waiting. We ate a quick breakfast, then set out hiking northeast, following trails that weren't on any map. The terrain was brutally steep, but Joseph moved with the confidence of someone who'd walked these paths countless times. After nearly 2 hours, we emerged onto a small plateau surrounded by massive old-growth cedars. And there, at the far edge of the clearing, standing perfectly still in the shadows, were 3 figures that made my breath catch in my throat. They were massive, unmistakably real, and nothing like I'd expected. The photographs and grainy videos had prepared me for something ape-like, brutish, but these beings had a presence, a dignity that transcended simple categorization. The center figure was clearly the eldest, perhaps 8 feet tall, with hair that had grayed around the face and shoulders. Her face was not quite human, not quite ape, but something in between, with eyes that watched us with unmistakable intelligence. Flanking her were 2 others, slightly smaller but still easily 7 feet tall. Joseph stepped forward slowly and spoke in his native language, his tone deferential. The eldest female responded with a series of low rumbles and higher-pitched sounds. They were talking. "Take out the offering," Joseph said to me. "Move slowly. Place it on the ground between us." My hands were shaking as I pulled out the package of dried fish Joseph had given me. I walked forward carefully, acutely aware of 6 eyes tracking my every movement, and placed the offering on the mossy ground. Then I stepped back. The male figure moved forward, his steps surprisingly quiet, and picked up the package. He brought it to his face, inhaling deeply, then made a sound I interpreted as approval before handing it to the elder. She examined it, then looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't an animal. This was a person in every meaningful sense of the word. With a gesture that was unmistakably a signal to follow, she turned and walked into the forest. We followed for over an hour, moving deeper into old-growth forest that few humans had probably ever seen. Eventually, we descended into a steep canyon, and there, carved into the canyon wall, I saw destruction that matched Joseph's photograph, but was far worse in person. The crater was enormous, perhaps 40 feet across, blown into solid rock. The surrounding forest was devastated. In the center of the crater lay twisted metal, cables, and mechanical housing with warning labels still visible. I moved closer, my professional training overriding my shock. It was seismic testing equipment used by mining and energy exploration firms. The eldest female vocalized sharply, a sound of clear distress and anger. She gestured emphatically at the destruction. Her meaning was unmistakable. This is what's happening. This is what drove us from our home. "What is this, Marcus?" Joseph asked. "Seismic testing equipment," I said, pulling out my camera. "Mining companies use explosives to map where valuable minerals might be. This shouldn't be here. This is protected wilderness." The equipment had company markings I could just make out. Cascade Mountain Resources. The elder led us to 2 more destruction sites over the next several hours. At the 3rd site, she picked up a long stick and began drawing in the sandy soil. Simple but clear images, circles for the explosions, stick figures for her people. Then she drew smaller stick figures, the young, and crossed them out. Dead. She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never expected to see in a non-human face. Grief. My throat tightened. I knelt beside her drawing and, using my own notebook, tried to explain what the equipment was, that it was human-caused. I drew a picture of a building, a company, and made an X over it, trying to indicate that this could be stopped. The elder watched intently. When I finished, she made a long, mournful sound and added more to her drawing, sketching figures fleeing the explosion circles. She was showing us the full cost: death, displacement, the destruction of their homes. "We have to stop this," I said to Joseph, my voice tight with anger. "This is illegal. This is my jurisdiction. I can report this, get it shut down." "But you cannot mention them," Joseph said urgently, gesturing at the 3 beings watching us. "I won't," I interrupted. "The environmental damage alone is sufficient. Destruction of old-growth habitat, contamination risk, disruption of wildlife corridors. I can make a case without ever mentioning them." I stood and addressed the elder directly, hoping she'd understand my intent. "I'll stop this. No more explosions, I promise you." The elder studied me for a long moment. Then she reached out with one massive hand and gently touched my face, her rough palm against my cheek. It was a gesture of trust, hope, and a desperate plea. The next 10 days were a blur. I hiked out, drove straight to Reading, and filed the most comprehensive emergency action request of my career. 47 pages of documentation, photographs, and soil analysis. I identified Cascade Mountain Resources and their lack of permits. I contacted the EPA and the Forest Service. Patricia Chen, initially skeptical, saw the evidence and became my strongest ally. 2 weeks later, federal agents raided Cascade Mountain Resources. They found records of unauthorized seismic testing across 50 square miles of protected wilderness. The company was searching for gold and rare earth elements using forged permits. Their operations were suspended, they faced millions in fines, and 2 executives were charged with environmental crimes. The explosions stopped. 3 weeks after the raid, Joseph called. The elder had conveyed her gratitude and left a gift for me. That weekend, I hiked out to the spot and found a carved wooden figure, perhaps 8 inches tall, showing a human and a tall, hairy figure standing side by side. It was a representation of partnership. I kept that carving in my office for the rest of my career. Over the years, Joseph and I maintained contact. He'd report suspicious activity, and I'd investigate through official channels, shutting down illegal grows or poaching operations. maintaining the buffer zone that allowed the ancient ones to live undisturbed. In September 1994, Joseph invited me to an equinox ceremony. As his family drummed and sang around a large fire in a high mountain meadow, the ancient ones emerged from the forest, 9 of them, including 2 juveniles. They stayed at the edge of the clearing, swaying to the rhythm, accepting the offerings of food placed at the meadow's perimeter. It was the most profound experience of my life. As the ceremony ended, the youngest juvenile approached, her large, curious eyes holding no fear. She studied me for a moment, made a sound like laughter, and scampered back to her family. Joseph smiled. She was showing acceptance. You've been approved by the young ones. That means you can be trusted. I retired from Fish and Wildlife in 2013 and bought a small cabin near Coffee Creek. Joseph passed away in 2006, but not before introducing me to his grandson David, who carried on the traditional knowledge. The responsibility had passed to a new generation. On summer evenings, I sometimes hike up to that meadow. I don't always see them, but I know they're there. I hear the woodknocks echoing across the valleys. Sometimes I find a gift left on my cabin porch, a carved box, unusual stones. They are symbols of the secret I've kept for over 2 decades, the knowledge that we share this planet with intelligent beings who have chosen invisibility as their strategy for survival. My encounter in 1991 taught me that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be protected. I became a guardian of that truth, a bridge between worlds, standing watch over forests that hold more than trees. The mountains keep their secrets, and so do I.